Hello, friends. Pastor Jeff here. We're now in week 4 of our summer book study experiment, reading Love is the Way by Bishop Michael Curry, virtually in this space together, dropping a video on YouTube every Tuesday in our Daily Bread email, summarizing a few of the contents for this week's chapter, posing a couple of questions. Would love to receive an email from you or make a comment on this YouTube video if you have something you'd like to share with our group. But this week's chapter, chapter 4, had, I think, the best chapter title in the whole book. It might have been worth the price of the book. What Desmond Tutu and Dolly Parton Have in Common. Isn't that a great title? What Desmond Tutu and Dolly Parton have in common. And the question he poses to us is this: can love really change the world? Or is it just Pollyannish and pie in the sky sort of optimism? The short answer to his question, what do Tutu and Parton have in common, is that they both were drawn in by a dream. Dolly Parton, growing up in rural, poor Appalachia, having to raise her own siblings and rising out of that context of poverty to become a musician and producer, an entrepreneur who's blessed the world in many ways. And of course, Desmond Tutu being the Archbishop of South Africa and being at the forefront of the movement to dismantle apartheid, and then to end up leading the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that sought to name the evil of that form of power and also sought to bring true reconciliation to that country. But Curry really reflects too on his own life in this chapter. Growing up in the 60s, we heard already about the tragic death of his mother in last chapter. When he was a young boy, I think in 1967, he talks about being haunted by the language of the dream in his upbringing, and really throughout his life, being haunted and being inspired by it. It's really both and for him. This notion that God has a dream for each one of us, and indeed for this world God loves so much, and that it's a responsibility for all of us to help realize that dream, to do our part to embody the way of God's love in the world. He touches on a number of different speakers, of course, Dr. King, Langston Hughes, many folks from his upbringing. He reflects on how the U.S. was at this hour of midnight, as Dr. King referred to it, in the late 60s with the Vietnam War, and then, of course, King's assassination. I think Robert Kennedy's assassination, his mom's death happened in 67. There was so much tumult for those of us who lived through the 60s. You well remember that time. But this moment of midnight is when things could go either way. Is it going to lead to the dawn of a new day and a restored sense of hope and possibility, or is it going to lead to an even deeper darkness and despair and division? And he reflects on that in this chapter from many different angles, and ends up talking about his growing up in Buffalo, New York, and how religion and politics were very much in the same conversation, not taboo topics to avoid. He talks about being part of a school that was integrated when he was just in middle school and then high school in the Buffalo, New York area, and how his father, from his position as a pastor, engaged in that work and did the work of organizing to create a better world, not just within the four walls of the church, but throughout the neighborhood. I just want to lift up at the very end, he talks about these 10 commandments of nonviolence that Dr. King asked all of his associates working with him in the 60s, asked all of them to reflect on each day. And he really viewed this as a way to turn a very negative situation into a more positive one that was laden with possibility rather than just despair. These 10 so-called commandments come at the end of the chapter. I think they begin on page 92. If you're reading along, I'd just like to read these for us. Number 1, again, these 10 commandments of nonviolence. Number 1 was meditate daily on the teachings and life of Jesus. Number 2, remember always that the nonviolent movement seeks justice and reconciliation, not just victory. Number 3, walk and talk in the manner of love, for God is love. Number 4, pray daily to be used by God in order that all people might be free. Number 5, sacrifice personal wishes in order that all people might be free. Number 6, observe with both friend and foe the ordinary rules of courtesy. Number 7, Seek to perform regular service for others and for the world. Number 8, refrain from the violence of fist, tongue, or heart. And then number 9, strive to be in good spiritual and bodily health. Each one of these in its own way really challenges us to remain centered on the God who is love and let that emanating force, which is the ground of all being, send us out as we strive to be beacons of that love, conduits of that love, agents of that love out in the world. I want to end by acknowledging we have this lovely children's book, and I wish I had it with me. I think it's back home in Eden and Simon's room, but it was written by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who's still living. He's quite frail now, I've heard, but the book title is God's Dream, and it's this lovely, just short volume reflecting on a world of peace and justice and kindness, and the sort of messages of the book not only paints the picture of God's dream, but it also conveys that God's invitation to all of us is to help God realize that dream, that God does not engage in the sort of fiat accompli where it's just ta-da, God's dream comes to pass, but rather God's intent and God's way of doing things is to do it via partnership, do it through us and by us and with us. And so that's the question and the challenge I'd leave you with. How is God inviting you to be part of realizing God's dream in 1,000 small concrete ways that each of us in our own lives, making daily decisions, can contribute to that. So I hold that challenge with you, friends, and commitment to you, and pray God's grace and peace with you this week and always. See you next time.